The golden doors of the ballroom swung open with a solemn creak, and hundreds of gazes turned toward her. Evaluating gazes, curious gazes, merciless gazes. Lady Helena Dorbury felt the weight of each one like stones hurled against her chest, but she kept her chin raised, the impeccable posture that years of refined upbringing had molded into her bones. Her heart raced beneath the pale blue silk bodice, each beat a war drum announcing her own execution. It was there, in that ballroom illuminated by crystal chandeliers, casting dancing shadows upon faces painted with false cordiality, that her fate would be sealed. Minutes before, her stepfather had announced her engagement to the Count of Blackwood, a man she would never love, a political arrangement disguised as romance that would transform her into a bargaining chip. And it was in that instant, with trembling breath and eyes burning with tears she refused to shed, that Helena made the decision that would change her life forever. She crossed the ballroom with determined steps, ignoring the whispers spreading like fire through dry straw, grabbed the first masculine hand within her reach, and whispered with an urgency she could not disguise, "Dance with me." Now, it was a plea, it was an act of desperation, it was an imminent scandal. The man did not hesitate. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. But to understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the beginning, to the weeks that preceded that fateful night, when Helena still believed she could control her own destiny. Helena Dorbury was 23 years old, an age at which many young women of the aristocracy had already found their paths as wives and mothers. Her golden hair, which that night was arranged in an elaborate updo adorned with delicate pearls, usually fell in soft waves over her shoulders when she let it loose in the mornings, while contemplating the gardens of the estate that once belonged to her father. Her emerald green eyes carried a depth that unsettled those who preferred empty and obedient women. There was intelligence in them, defiance, and an ancient sadness she had learned to hide behind polite smiles. Her fair skin contrasted with the blush on her cheeks that flared easily when she was irritated or emotional, betraying feelings she preferred to keep guarded. She was a woman of classic beauty, natural elegance, and a bearing that revealed refined breeding, even though her social position was about to be negotiated like merchandise in the grand matrimonial market of high society. There was something about Helena that set her apart from other young women of her class. She was the type of woman who read forbidden books in secret, who questioned conventions in silence, and who dreamed of a life where her worth would not be measured by the title of the man who would wed her. The wound she carried was deep and ancient. Her father, Lord Edward Dorbury, had passed away when she was only 15, leaving her in the care of a fragile mother who 2 years later married again to Sir Richard Hartwell, a man with an easy smile and calculating eyes. Helena had never trusted her stepfather. There was something in his excessively gentle gestures, in his carefully chosen words, that made her feel as if she were being watched by a patient predator. And when her mother fell ill and departed 3 years ago, Helena realized she was completely alone, a prisoner in a house that no longer felt like home, under the control of a man who saw in her only an opportunity for social advancement. The Dorbury mansion, once vibrant with laughter and music, had become a mausoleum of memories. The corridors seemed longer, the rooms emptier, and Helena frequently found herself wandering through the gardens her mother had loved so much, searching in the rose beds for some vestige of the love that once filled those walls. It was in these moments of solitude that she allowed the tears to fall, far from the curious eyes of servants and the condescending smile of her stepfather. The days dragged on like sand slipping through fingers, each dawn bringing with it the same feeling of imprisonment that refused to depart. Helena knew her stepfather was planning something. The frequent meetings with important-looking men, the whispered conversations that ceased when she entered the rooms, the evaluating glances he cast in her direction as if calculating her worth in pounds sterling. And then came the announcement. The Count of Blackwood, a man 20 years her senior, a widower with a reputation for coldness that would make winter seem welcoming, had asked for her hand. There was no consultation, there was no choice, only the information that the Duchess of Pemberton's ball would be the stage for her official engagement. Would it be possible to escape a destiny traced by others' hands? Would it be possible to find freedom when all doors seemed locked? The man whose hand she had grabbed that night was tall, elegantly imposing, standing nearly 6'3". His broad shoulders filled the perfectly tailored black coat with a natural authority that needed no words to assert itself. His dark chestnut hair, slightly wavy, was combed back, revealing impeccable aristocratic features. A chiseled jaw, straight nose, firmly set lips that seemed unaccustomed to smiling. But it was his eyes that captured Helena. Blue-gray, cold as the harshest winter, they carried a calculated intensity that made her feel as if she were being dissected, analyzed, understood at levels she preferred to keep hidden. Alexander de Ravencourt, Duke of Ravencourt, was 32 years old and had a reputation that preceded him like thunder before a storm. A widower for 4 years, he had never shown interest in marrying again. He was known for his impeccable coldness, for precise political decisions, and for never involving himself in public dramas. He had returned to England only 3 months prior, after years of managing estates on the continent, and the salons of high society buzzed with speculation about his intentions. There was something about Alexander that defied definition. He was the type of man who commanded attention without demanding it, who silenced conversations merely by entering a room, who made women sigh and men straighten their posture. But behind that marble facade existed wounds he guarded with the same care with which he protected his secrets. His wife, Lady Catherine, had died during childbirth of a child who also did not survive. The Duke never spoke of that period, but those who knew him closely noticed how he avoided cradles, how his eyes turned away from small children, how there was in his silence a pain that words could not reach. When Helena grabbed his hand that night, Alexander felt something he had not experienced in years: curiosity. There was something in the desperate determination of that young woman that resonated in places of his soul he believed dead. She did not ask permission. She did not apologize. She simply demanded his participation in a rebellion whose consequences she clearly had not calculated. And he, against all his aristocratic training, against all his cultivated caution, closed his long, firm fingers over hers and led her to the center of the ballroom. The waltz began, and with it, a dance far more dangerous. The touch became too conscious. His hand on her waist burned through the fabric like white-hot iron. Their synchronized breathing created an intimacy almost indecent for such attentive eyes. Helena felt his rigid self-control in every precise step, in the way he maintained the exact distance etiquette demanded. Not a centimeter more, not a centimeter less. He perceived her wounded pride in the firmness of her chin, in the way she refused to lower her gaze, even when the murmurs around them became audible. "Are you aware of what you have just done?" His voice was deep, controlled, each word measured as if it cost gold. "I am aware that I prefer a public scandal to a private prison," she replied, her green eyes challenging his icy blue ones. "If that troubles you, you may abandon me in the middle of the ballroom. It will only add another chapter to my ruin." Something flickered in those cold eyes. Surprise, admiration. Helena could not decipher it, but she felt that for the first time that night, someone saw her not as a piece on a board, but as a person. The weeks passed like leaves carried by the wind, and with them, something began to change silently in both their hearts. The scandal of the waltz was not enough to break the engagement, only to postpone it, while Sir Richard controlled the damage to her reputation. But Helena discovered that the paths of destiny are mysterious, and that accidental encounters can be as inevitable as sunrise. She found him first in the gardens of the Countess of Ashford during an afternoon tea to which both had been invited. Alexander stood beside a white rose bush, his imposing figure contrasting with the delicacy of the flowers, and his eyes found hers the instant she crossed through the wrought iron gate. "Lady Helena," he inclined his head in formal greeting. "I see you survived the social massacre." "Surviving is a specialty of mine, Your Grace." She approached, maintaining the appropriate distance, though something in her wanted to diminish it. "I've learned that society has a short memory when new scandals arise." "And do you intend to generate new scandals to divert attention?" "I intend to live my life in the way I consider right. If that generates scandals, the fault lies not with me, but with a society that confuses blind obedience with virtue." There was something about Helena that fascinated Alexander. She was the type of woman who did not bend, who kept her spine straight even when the world tried to break her. He recognized in her a strength he admired, a determination that mirrored his own. The encounters multiplied, a conversation beneath the silvery light of the French garden during a formal dinner, intense gazes during private concerts, when the music seemed to create a veil of intimacy around them, the lingering touch when he helped her into the carriage after an evening at the opera, his fingers remaining on hers, half a second beyond what was necessary. How many times did Helena find herself thinking of him during lonely nights? How many times did she imagine conversations they would never have, confessions they would never make? The proximity was becoming dangerous. The dialogues between them were laden with elegant irony, subtle provocations, silences that said more than declarations. Helena began to notice things she should not have noticed. The way Alexander's eyes darkened when her stepfather was mentioned. The tension in his jaw when her late father's name arose in conversations. The excessive distrust with which he observed Sir Richard at social events. "Did you know my father?" she asked one evening. As they walked along the terrace, illuminated by torches during a ball, Alexander hesitated. It was only a second, but Helena noticed. "I knew his reputation." "And what was that?" "Reputation?" The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was laden with unspoken words, with truths that hung in the air like ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. "Your father was a man of honor," he said finally, and there was something in his voice Helena could not identify. Regret, guilt. A rare man in times when honor became a bargaining chip. "My stepfather would disagree." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. "He always insinuates that my father left debts, stains on our reputation that only an advantageous marriage could cleanse." "Your stepfather is a liar." The declaration was so direct, so devoid of the usual aristocratic diplomacy that Helena stopped walking. Her eyes found his, searching for truth in those blue-gray depths. "What do you know that I do not?" He did not answer, but something in his gaze promised revelations that would change everything. Time, that implacable master who waits for no one, continued its inexorable course. The engagement to the Count of Blackwood was rescheduled for the Grand Winter Ball, an event that would gather the cream of European aristocracy. Sir Richard was determined to conclude the arrangement, and Helena felt the walls of her prison closing around her. It was on a rainy afternoon, while seeking refuge in Lady Pemberton's library during a tea, that she found the first piece of the puzzle that would destroy her illusions and reveal truths long buried. a document forgotten between the pages of an ancient book, a letter in her father's handwriting addressed to the old Duke of Ravencourt, Alexander's father. Words that spoke of sacrifice, of protection, of a debt of honor that could never be repaid. Helena read again. Read until tears blurred her vision and her hands trembled so much that the paper nearly slipped from her fingers. Her engagement was not merely a social agreement, it was part of a plan to cover up an old financial embezzlement that directly involved her late father and the Ravencourt family. And Alexander knew. He had known from the beginning. The betrayal burned in her chest like acid poured on an open wound. The confrontation happened in the library of Ravencourt Palace during a soiree Helena attended with the sole purpose of obtaining answers. She waited until the guests were distracted by the musical performances in the main hall, then slipped through the corridors until she found the door she sought. Alexander stood by the window, contemplating the rain lashing the gardens. When he heard the door open, he turned, and something in his face changed when he saw who it was. Helena. It was the first time he used only her name, without titles, without formalities. You knew. Her voice was a whisper laden with pain. You knew from that first night. You knew who I was, what my father did, what my stepfather was planning. Helena, let me explain. Explain what? That you used me as a piece in some political game. I do not understand. That dance was not chance, but calculated strategy. She approached him, her green eyes shining with contained tears, her chest rising and falling with irregular breathing. They were too close. His warmth enveloped her like an embrace she had not requested. His scent, wood and spices, invaded her senses like sweet poison. You made me believe. Her voice faltered. You made me believe there was someone who saw me as a person, not as currency. And all along, you were just another player on this cursed board. Alexander closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was something in them Helena had never expected to see: vulnerability. That first dance was chance, he said, his voice hoarse with long suppressed emotions. You grabbed my hand before I could think, before I could calculate. And when your eyes met mine, when I felt your determination, your courage, your desperation, he paused, as if the words cost him more than he could pay. In that moment, something changed, something I cannot name, but that prevented me from acting as I should have. And what should you have done? I should have distanced myself. I should have maintained distance, protected my interests, let your stepfather conclude his plans. He took a step toward her, but I could not, because there was something about you, Helena. There was something about you that reminded me what it means to feel. How could she believe him? How could she trust when trust had already been destroyed so many times? Tell me the truth, she demanded. All of it. Without omissions, without half words. I owe it to my father. And Alexander told her. Years before, during a financial crisis that threatened to destroy the Ravencourt duchy, an accounting error of catastrophic proportions was discovered. An error that, if exposed, would ruin not only the Ravencourt family, but dozens of families who depended on the duchy's estates. Alexander's father, desperate, sought help, and it was Lord Edward Dorbury who answered the call. Edward took the blame. He manipulated documents so that the error would appear to be his. He sacrificed his honor, his reputation, his own family's future to protect people he did not even know personally. When he died years later, he took the secret with him, leaving Helena and her mother at the mercy of whispers and suspicions they never fully understood. My father discovered the truth before he died, Alexander continued, his voice laden with ancestral shame. He left me instructions to repair the injustice, to restore Lord Edward's name, to protect you and your mother from any consequences of our family's mistakes. Then why did you do nothing? Why did you let my mother die believing my father was dishonest? Why did you let me be sold like cattle to pay a debt that does not exist? Because I was far away. Because I did not know the extent of your stepfather's plans. Because... He hesitated, and the pain in his eyes was so genuine that Helena felt her own heart clench. Because I was a coward, because it was easier to manage distant estates than to face the ghosts that awaited me here. The silence between them was dense, laden with years of secrets and regrets. Helena felt her legs weaken, the world spin around her as she tried to process revelations that turned her life upside down. I returned to fix what my family destroyed, Alexander said, taking another step toward her. I returned to prevent you from being used as currency of silence. I returned... He stopped centimeters. From her, so close she could feel his breath on her skin. I returned because I could not stop thinking about a woman with green eyes who had the courage to defy all of society with a single dance. Helena wanted to believe. She wanted to believe. She wanted to believe with an intensity that frightened her. How can I trust you? You cannot. Not yet. He raised his hand, and his fingers brushed her face with a gentleness that contrasted with his imposing appearance. But give me the chance to prove myself. Give me the chance to restore your father's name, to free you from this engagement, to show that not everything in this world is calculated and cold. And then, something unexpected happened. She kissed him. It was Helena who eliminated the distance between them, who rose on tiptoe and captured his lips with hers. It was a kiss born of desperation and hope intermingled, of rage and desire intertwined, of years of solitude finally finding a harbor. Alexander froze for a second, only a second. Then his arms enveloped her, pulling her against his chest, and he returned the kiss with an intensity that left her breathless. There was hunger in that kiss, an accumulated need that exploded like a broken dam. There was also tenderness, a silent promise of protection and devotion. When they finally separated, both breathless, eyes locked on eyes, something had changed irrevocably. Helena, he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. Alexander. It was the first time she used his name, and the intimacy of that moment, of those two words whispered in the dimness of a library, was greater than any formal declaration could ever be. The months passed, like pages turned of a book whose ending no one dared imagine. Alexander worked in silence, gathering documents, testimonies, evidence that would restore Lord Edward's honor and expose Sir Richard's machinations. Helena, for the first time in years, allowed herself to feel hope. She allowed herself to dream of a future that would not be a gilded prison. They met when possible, always discreet, always aware of the eyes watching them. But there was in those encounters a sweetness Helena had never experienced. Conversations about books and philosophy, shared laughter about the absurdities of high society, comfortable silences where words were unnecessary. The transformation was visible to those who knew how to observe. Helena, who had spent years moving through the world like a ghost of herself, began to smile again. Her eyes recovered a sparkle that the loss of her father had extinguished. Alexander, known for his impeccable coldness, was seen more than once with a discreet smile on his lips, a relaxation in his shoulders that his acquaintances did not recognize. But Sir Richard was no fool, and villains rarely give up without a fight. The grand winter ball arrived like a long-announced storm. The ballroom was decorated with crystals imitating ice, white flowers perfuming the air, candles creating an atmosphere of dreams that contrasted with the approaching nightmare. Helena entered on her stepfather's arm, dressed in a silver gown that made her look like a queen from ancient legends. Her eyes sought Alexander immediately, finding him on the other side of the ballroom, imposing in his black coat, his blue-grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her blush. The announcement of the engagement to the Count of Blackwood was made with pomp and circumstance. Polite applause filled the ballroom. Helena felt her throat tighten, her hands tremble beneath the silk gloves. It was then that Sir Richard made his move. "But before we celebrate this union," he announced, his voice carrying through the silenced ballroom, "there are truths that must be revealed. Truths about the illustrious Duke of Ravencourt and his family of thieves." Murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd. Alexander remained motionless, only his eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. Sir Richard revealed everything: the Ravencourt's financial error, Lord Edward's supposed complicity, accusations embellished and distorted that painted both Helena's father and the Duke's family as criminals of the worst sort. "And the final proof of their corruption," Sir Richard concluded with a triumphant smile, "is the inappropriate relationship between my stepdaughter and that man, a relationship that began in this very ballroom months ago with a scandalous dance that all witnessed." The ballroom erupted in murmurs. Accusations flew like poisoned arrows. Helena felt the world spin, her legs weaken, and it was then that she made her second great decision. Enough! Her voice cut through the chaos like a sharpened blade. The ballroom fell silent. Enough lies, enough manipulations, enough treating me like property to be negotiated. She freed herself from her stepfather's arm, walked to the center of the ballroom, with firm steps that belied the terror she felt inside. "I, Lady Helena Dorbury, break my engagement to the Count of Blackwood." Her voice was clear, strong, carrying to the most distant corners of the ballroom. "And I demand the reopening of the investigation that tarnished my father's name. I demand that the truth, all of it, be brought to light." "You have no authority for that," Sir Richard growled, the smile disappearing from his face. "You are nothing more than—" "She has all the authority necessary." Alexander walked to the center of the ballroom, stopping beside Helena. His presence was like a stone wall, unshakable, protective. "And I, Alexander de Ravencourt, Duke of Ravencourt, publicly assume the moral debt of my family. It was an error of the duchy that Lord Edward Dorbury covered up, sacrificing his own honor to protect innocence. He was a hero, not a criminal, and anyone who says otherwise will have to answer to me." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even breaths dared disturb the air laden with tension. "Lady Helena was never an instrument," Alexander continued, his voice carrying an emotion no one had ever heard from him. "She was never a piece in any game. She was, from the first moment, a choice, my choice, the only choice that matters." He turned to her, and in his eyes was something that made Helena's heart stop. "I love you, Helena. I love your courage, your intelligence, your refusal to bend. I love the way your eyes shine when you argue with me, the way your laughter illuminates entire rooms. I love everything you are and everything we can be together." Helena felt tears streaming down her face, but she did not care. She did not care about the gazes, the murmurs, about anything beyond the man before her and the words he spoke. "Alexander." Her voice faltered, her throat tight with emotion. "You do not need to answer now." He took her hands, their fingers intertwining as they always should have been. "You owe me nothing. But if you give me the chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving I am worthy of you." What did destiny hold for those two wounded souls? Who could say? But in that moment, before hundreds of witnesses, something magical was happening. "I love you too," Helena whispered, the words escaping from her heart before she could contain them. "I have loved you since that first waltz, since the moment you took my hand and made me feel I was not alone. I love your strength, your honor, the gentle man who hides behind the mask of ice." Alexander kissed her. Right there, in the center of the ballroom, before all the assembled aristocracy. It was a kiss of promise, of beginning, of a happy ending unfolding before hundreds of astonished eyes. The scandal was deafening, but it was also liberating. With the truths exposed, the investigation was reopened, documents were found, testimonies were gathered, and Lord Edward Dorbury's honor was finally restored. Sir Richard, his machinations revealed, lost his social position and was forced to leave England in disgrace. The Count of Blackwood, realizing he had been used as a pawn in a larger game, withdrew discreetly, seeking a less complicated bride in distant lands. The days transformed into weeks, the weeks into months, and the wound that seemed impossible to heal began slowly to close. Helena ceased to be a piece in a political game. She became the protagonist of her own story. The wedding took place in spring, when the gardens of Ravencourt Palace exploded in colors and fragrances. Helena wore the veil that had belonged to her mother, and as she walked down the aisle of the chapel, her eyes found Alexander's, and she knew with a certainty that warmed every inch of her being that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years passed like fulfilled promises, each day bringing new joys Helena had never imagined possible. The Ravencourt mansion, once silent as a tomb, filled with children's laughter. First came Edward, named in honor of the grandfather he would never know, with his mother's green eyes and his father's determination. Then came Catherine, delicate and strong like the memory of the wife Alexander had lost, but different in everything that mattered, a new beginning instead of a shadow of the past. Helena discovered that happiness was not the absence of pain, but the presence of enough love to overcome any storm. She discovered that trusting again was possible when you had beside you someone worthy of that trust. She discovered that the hand she had grabbed that night of desperation was, after all, the hand destined to lead her forever. On a golden autumn afternoon, while watching Alexander play with the children in the garden, she had transformed into a replica of the one her mother had loved so much. Helena felt her eyes burn with tears, but they were tears of gratitude, of joy, of a fullness that overflowed from her heart. Alexander raised his eyes, finding hers across the distance, and smiled. That smile that was hers alone, that revealed the man behind the Duke, that promised eternal love in its simplicity. And Helena smiled back, because some stories deserve happy endings, because sometimes the hand you grab to escape is the same one destined to lead you forever. Because true love knows no calculations, does not respect conventions, does not bow before obstacles. Because she waited. She waited without knowing what would come. She waited even when everything seemed lost, and the wait was worth every second of pain. In the gardens illuminated by the setting sun, Helena walked to where her family awaited her. Alexander extended his hand to her, not to save her, but to walk beside her. And she took that hand with the same determination as that first night, knowing that this time it was not escape, it was love, it was choice, it was forever. Dear listeners, we hope this story has touched your heart. If you were moved, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what touched you most. Every day we bring real stories full of emotion and humanity. Your voice is part of this universe.